The warmest of greetings to you, and welcome to Happily Ever Teaching! In this podcast, we help you enthrall your learners in every subject under the sun using the best teaching method known to science, storytelling. To do this, we feature special guest educators who are passionately keen for your children to become amazing and successful human beings. I am storyteller Chip Cahoon, and with me this week is...
I'm Toria Bono. I am a primary teacher in a junior school on the South Coast, and I'm also the host of the podcast Tiny Voice Talks. Lovely to be here.
Hi, I'm Helen. I'm a teacher in Buckinghamshire, currently teaching reception and Year 1 children.
And today we are exploring learning outcomes in science with this week's folktale from Colombia. You can listen to the story by downloading our sister podcast, Fables and Fairy Tales, or search our website, epictales.co.uk, for Basket Babies. There you'll find a video of me telling the story that you can share with your children. And if you sign up as an Epic Educator, you'll also get a copy as an ebook or paperback, as well as the full audiobook for you to download at any time, and there are even some tips for telling the story yourself. Plus, of course, a whole heap of resources to go with the lesson ideas we're about to discuss, and extra lesson ideas that we didn't have time to fit into this podcast. Right now, though, let's continue our discussion with Helen and Toria. And after coming down a little bit from the high of our 100th episode, let's start exploring some more science with our basket babies. Can we start with you, Helen, for ages 4 to 7?
Yeah, you definitely can. I thought there were some really good science links with this story. One sort of more investigation based and a couple more sort of science knowledge based around the Key Stage 1 science curriculum, in which you can then bring the early years 7 areas of learning into, which is what's nice about them. They're so holistic and broad, you can bring them in. But this would be kind of sort of the understanding the world area as well.
Gotcha.
So the first one was a bit of an investigation. The Wicked Sisters have to send these babies down the river, and they have to get at least as far as the crocodile's nest, but hopefully further to the cottage. And I thought this was a good opportunity to explore materials and floating and sinking. So the children need to find out which material would be best and the safest for getting a baby down a river. So it needs to be waterproof, it mustn't sink, it mustn't let water in, preferably mustn't let crocodiles in. And you've got a great afternoon, at least. Probably more, actually, if you're going to broaden it out to looking at materials, naming materials, the properties of materials, and then the actual investigation. So I thought that would be a really, really good science investigation for Key Stage 1 in the early years.
Yeah.
And of course, you'll get them outside with either a puddle, if you've got a puddle nearby, or a tub of water, as I usually use, and get them doing.
I thought you said you usually build a river in your classroom, and I was imagining a proper straight down the middle of the room
with actual water. So you could, of course, do it that way. You could have water flowing through your river that you've used previously for all kinds of activities, and then you're going to get the babies. And I wouldn't recommend using actual babies from a health and safety point of view. I must stress that point. I do not suggest using actual babies, but you could use teddy bears that are less vulnerable to carry out this investigation. So that was the first science activity. The next one is, again, kind of about babies, but a bit more caring, is finding out how different it would be looking after a puppy to looking after a baby, or a kitten and a baby, because there's, in the Key Stage 1 curriculum, there's a lot about animals and young animals and what animals need and how to care for animals. And the idea, obviously, that people are mammals too. So that could be a project for the children, finding out what they need to survive, naming mammals, understanding that humans are mammals too, maybe going on for a bit of a literacy link to write some instructions for looking after a puppy or a baby or both, and looking at how they're different as well. How are they different? Yeah. What would be different for the princess looking after a puppy than if she actually had a baby to look after? So that was my next link. And then finally, another area of the Key Stage 1 science curriculum is around plants and naming common plants. So I thought this would be a great idea to talk about the idea of designing the best garden they can using their knowledge of plants. So not just drawing sort of lots and lots of flowers with lots and lots of petals and leaves, but actually getting the children to learn some common flowers, that what they look like, their names. You could go on a walk, which I like to do with my children whenever I can, when I've got enough adults around. So let's go for a walk, and they can spot daisies and daffodils if it's that time of year, and buttercups and all those common plants and trees that, well, in the part of the country where I am, you see. And then the children learn their names and recognize them, and then they design the best garden they can for the royal visitors based upon what they've learned.
And as part of that, do they start to explore and research which plants can grow next to each other? Maybe why, or because obviously if you have a massive great tree and for half of the day you've got some shadow around it, that's going to make it harder for certain plants to grow in that shadow.
So yeah, you could take it further, couldn't you? Because another part of the curriculum is how do plants grow and what do plants need to survive. So then if you take this idea further, then you can bring in that element as well. Where are you going to put in your garden design, where are you going to put the different plants so that they can best thrive?
Perhaps combine them and start thinking about what would be the best garden for the puppy or the kitten or the stick, or for all three. A garden that's got a nice big green area for the dog to chase the stick in, but also a shaded area for it to keep out the sun and that sort of thing.
There you go, and you've linked the two activities beautifully there. You've got a whole week's worth of science looking after animals and plants.
Fantastic. How about you then, Toria, looking up the ages to 7 to 11?
Well, my ideas actually are a nice development on, I think, from Helen's. So Helen talked about, how do we look after humans and puppies and so on. And actually in the Year 5 curriculum, you've got looking at the changes from birth to death in humans, but also other animals. So actually, how do our bodies change? How do we grow and so on? And actually looking at, so it links in very much to looking after a young human as opposed to a young puppy, as opposed to a young kitten, and indeed a stick, and actually the growing and the aging and the changing. So I thought that would link in. Then I'm fascinated about the aspect of Columbia within all of this, because when it comes to the garden, again, scattered throughout the story are lots of pieces that give you a clue to the fact that it wasn't set in a local habitat. It was set in a warm habitat, and a warm habitat that encouraged growth of plants that we couldn't have here. So actually, again, looking at the habitat of Columbia, comparing that to our own. And in the Year 6 curriculum, you've got the habitats and so on, but actually comparing that to our own. And then looking at the river within the Year 4 curriculum, you've got all about rivers, etc. That's actually geography as well. But looking at rivers, looking at habitats around rivers, looking at what plants grow best there. So I think there's so much that you could do by looking at Columbia and why that story was written in Columbia and wasn't necessarily an English folktale.
Are you going to come back to a lot of this for our geography discussion?
I think I probably will. You could probably press repeat and it'll just be saying the same thing. But yeah, I thought those two things were interesting. The other thing I thought was really interesting is I'm slightly obsessed with crocodiles. I love crocodiles. So actually you could look at the similarities and differences between freshwater and a saltwater crocodile.
Oh, yes.
And which would you want to be in a basket floating next to?
If you had to.
Yes, because you said previously that actually you discovered that the crocodiles in Columbia were pretty lethal.
Yeah, so I don't know whether we had that discussion on record, so I'll just say it again that I had wanted, when the sisters were sending their babies down the river to get eaten by crocodiles, I did a little bit of research before first telling the story to find out whether I could say something like, but the crocodiles in Colombia are never any threat to humankind, and that be the reason why the babies were able to go on safely to the gardener. But I found out that actually they are some of the most dangerous to mankind in the world. So I had to make sure that the babies ended up going by the gardener's cottage well before they ever came to a crocodile nest. which worked out more safely for everyone, I think.
But I think that brings up a really interesting point, which is the fact that just because they are crocodiles doesn't mean that they're all exactly the same.
Yes,
just
that's
as
true.
all humans are not exactly the same, all crocodiles aren't exactly the same. And actually, then if you're looking more deeply at what the difference is between freshwater and saltwater, and then actually you bring alligators into it.
Why not?
Why not?
And
what's the difference?
That's the kind of thing that would absolutely fascinate any age child, isn't it?
Yes.
That crocodiles, alligators, teeth, eating people and things.
I remember having, when I was teaching year 2, I had an alligator skull and I had a crocodile skull. And oh my goodness, the conversations that the children were able to have just looking at the two different skulls and actually really unpicking which one would be more dangerous and why. It's fascinating. So completely tangential there, as always, but yes.
Before we leave the science, though, just flipping back to how bodies are changing with age that you brought up there, because you've kind of already mentioned aging a little bit in the maths discussion that we were having a couple of episodes ago, and I think there's got to be some PSHE elements in there as well, especially for the older ages, wouldn't there be with 10s and 11s? Could this also be a sort of subtle lead into any sex education that you might be doing to start looking at the way bodies change as you grow?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think there's a lot of potential when you are discussing that developing bodies, developing humans, you are naturally, I think it leads perfectly. I'm not quite sure how, which is why I'm waffling at the moment, but I think there absolutely is, but I would need to think really carefully about how to approach it and in which aspect. I don't know if you've got any thoughts off the top of your head, Helen, but I'm not sure off the top of mine how I'd approach it. I was just thinking
how to approach it. There's definitely a way in, isn't there?
I was just thinking it might set the background, if you like, the foundation for those sorts of discussions, especially when you have that discussion, if you're going to have it with older years, about what sort of age they would start the characters at. You mentioned the gardener and his wife, and obviously one of the clues you get from the start of the story is that they've tried to have a baby and they haven't been successful. So that gives you some clue to their age. And then you have the sisters who are making wishes about who they're going to marry. That is giving you a clue as to their age, perhaps, and the fact that they then do actually get married, and one of them goes very swiftly into child rearing. There are all of these clues as to ages, and I think if you were to go from that as to where our bodies might be in the sort of time that allows us to have these sorts of thoughts and discussions with each other. I don't know. I just thought that this could be a wonderful way to sort of link the. Obviously, you're starting it, I think, with the maths discussion and that we were talking about last week, but then looking at it from a more sciencey point of view, and then going straight from that back into the emotional side of it, and the idea of, okay, my body might be ready for this, but my emotions might not be, and maybe exploring that from the context of the story could be a really safe way of doing that. And of course the other way around as well, my emotions might be ready for this, but my body might not be. That which is how it was for the gardener and his wife. That's all we have time for in this episode, folks. We'd love to hear your thoughts on everything we've discussed in this podcast, so please find us on social media using @TeachHappily, or leave us a review using your favorite podcast app. You can also use social media to let us know if there's a subject you're soon to teach that you'd like us to cover. We would love to help. Please also share this podcast with your colleagues and help us start a story-led revolution in classrooms around the world, so children everywhere can learn in a way that's effective, memorable, and enjoyable all at the same time. Tomorrow, the gardener and his family will help us explore geography. But right now, it only remains for us to say cheerio, and we hope to hear your story soon. So, cheerio!
And we hope to hear your story soon.